Hey guys, today our lesson question is what are the different types of feedback and how can they be used to improve performance? Our keywords for today, kinesthetic feedback, also known as intrinsic feedback, which is a type of intrinsic feedback received via receptors in the muscles, sensations that are felt by the performer, providing information from movement. We also have extrinsic feedback. So this is feedback from outside of the performer. So this may be from a coach as an example. Feedback to sports people at beginner and elite levels. A coach will need to judge what type of feedback, intrinsic or extrinsic, is most effective in helping the performer to acquire an improvement in their skills. This will vary depending on the performer's experience, ability, and learning style. The following factors will help make a judgment. So we look at the advantages of intrinsic and extrinsic feedback. So the advantages of intrinsic feedback, it helps a performer to focus on the feel of a skill. It helps a performer to solve problems themselves. It helps them to develop skills independently, and it gives performers more time to practice. Now, the advantages of extrinsic feedback. It provides new or additional guidance, helps performers to identify problems, offers solutions to problems, and prevents performers from reaching a dead end. Most performers benefit from a mix of intrinsic and extrinsic feedback. It's generally beginners and elite level performers will seek different types of feedback at different times. So, if we have a look at beginners, a beginner can be thought of as a novice. When a performer is new to a sport, they may need more extrinsic feedback to start with. This helps them to acquire the basic skills. Elite level performers, an experienced performer who is familiar with the sport, will have acquired the basic skills and they may have developed into an elite performer. They may need more intrinsic feedback to refine and master those skills. However, experienced performers will also need extrinsic feedback to overcome persistent problems and to develop more complex skills. So, one type of feedback that we can look at is positive feedback. So, is experience when a performer achieves the intended outcome. So, an example, when a rugby player passes a ball, they receive positive feedback when they see that the receiver successfully catches their pass. Or another example, a gymnast would receive positive feedback when they feel the full surface of the beam strike their foot as they land accurately after a somersault. Then we have negative feedback. So, negative feedback is experienced when a performer does not achieve the intended outcome. So, for example, when a netball player shoots and the ball bounces off the rim and misses, the player receives negative feedback. This encourages the shooter to adjust their technique in future shots. An archer's arrow may not hit the bullseye. They will then adjust their technique for the next arrow so it lands closer to the center of the target. Knowledge of results. So we look to focus on the end of the performance. For example, the performer's score, time, or position. It is sometimes called terminal feedback and can be thought of as the outcome of a performance. So, an example, a 100-meter sprinter seeing their time at the end of the race. We can also see here we have the Premier League table from the 2019-2020 Premier League season, and that tells you the positioning on the table at the end of the season. Knowledge of performance. This focuses on how well the athlete performed and the quality of the movement, not the end result. So, for example, a golfer may receive feedback that they have putted very well, even if their drives were less effective. Intrinsic feedback. Intrinsic feedback is the feel or the physical feel of the movement as it is being performed. It is what is felt by the performer as they execute a skill or performance. So the advantages of intrinsic feedback are that it helps performers to focus on the feel of a skill. It helps performers to solve problems themselves. It helps performers to develop skills independently, and it gives performers more time to practice. Extrinsic feedback is provided by external sources during or after a performance. It can come from teachers, coaches, teammates, and also includes things that the performer can hear or see. So, an example, a wheelchair basketball player can hear verbal feedback from a coach, comments from teammates, the response of the spectators, and the referee's decisions. So, extrinsic feedback is needed by beginner performers. They get feedback from people more experienced than them. Need extrinsic feedback from coaches, as the performer may be unaware of what a successful movement looks like. They may need feedback from others about what they need to correct. So, advantages of extrinsic feedback. It provides new or additional guidance. It helps performers to identify problems. It offers solutions to problems and prevents performers from reaching a dead end. So, let's have a look at some sporting examples. A skier may feel they don't have very good control of the skis when making a turn and can feel off balance. So this would be intrinsic feedback, knowledge of performance, and feedback or negative feedback. A wheelchair basketball player during a game can hear verbal feedback from a coach, comments from teammates, the response of spectators, and the referee's decisions. Extrinsic feedback. A golfer sees his position at the end of a competition. This is an example of knowledge of results and extrinsic feedback. A netball shooter can see if the ball goes in the hoop and hears the score at the end of the game. This is an example of extrinsic feedback and knowledge of results. So let's have a look at some questions. What type of feedback comes from the coach? This would be an example of extrinsic feedback. Which of the following is an example of extrinsic feedback during a basketball match? The shooter feels balance as they jump to shoot. The coach shouts encouragement from the bench. The defender shifts their weight forward to be in the right defensive position. Extrinsic coming externally, so that would be an example of the coach shouting encouragement from the bench. That would be the extrinsic feedback. Okay, next question. When a netball goal shooter sees their shot fall through the net, what kind of feedback? It could be intrinsic, it could be continuous, but the answer to that is terminal. Remember before that terminal is another way of saying knowledge of results. Okay, now we have an exam question. This is a 4-mark question. A performer can receive feedback extrinsically or intrinsically. Justify why extrinsic feedback would be more beneficial for a beginner sport. Now, because this is a 4-mark question, we need to look at the term justify. Justify is our key word. So, how do we go about this question? So, it would be an AO3, so 4 marks. So, it's really about justifying and explaining your response. So, some examples that we have here. We would award 1 mark for each of the following points. Beginners need extrinsic feedback from a coach as they are unaware of what constitutes a successful movement. Beginners are unaware of what the movement should feel like, so intrinsic feedback is unavailable. Beginners do not have the knowledge to identify what needs to be worked on to perform a successful movement. And beginners need extrinsic feedback from others to point out what needs to be corrected to perform a successful movement. So 4 points, 1 mark for each point. So reminder of what we have looked at today. We have looked at kinesthetic feedback or intrinsic feedback. We've looked at extrinsic feedback. We've looked at positive feedback, negative feedback, knowledge of results, also known as terminal feedback, and knowledge of performance. In our next lesson, we're going to be looking at different types of guidance.